Hi, everybody, and thank you for watching the Positive Talk Hour. I am your show host, Jeremy McDonald, and I have two wonderful guests here on the show today. We had Dr. Eben Alexander on the show a few weeks ago, and we have his partner, Karen, and I'm going to mess up your last name. I hope I don't mess it up. Newell, I got that right?
Yes, that's
okay.
correct. Newell.
All right, perfect. So we're going to be talking about her business, Sacred Acoustics, and what she does, and their exploration of consciousness and how they teach how to get deeper into yourselves and expand out into consciousness. And their new book that is coming out, I believe, on October 18th, if I'm getting the date correctly.
October 17th.
17th, Living in the Mindful Universe. So how are you both doing today?
Great. How about you?
I am doing good. As we were talking before we got on the show, is that I braved a hurricane and we're doing great.
Glad you weathered that one.
No flooding at my house, which was great. I was very happy. So, I'm excited to hear about for Sacred Acoustics. I would actually like to. I've done hemisync and holosync and stuff like that, and a friend of mine has a thing called. I'm going to think, and now I'm losing my mind. He has something similar. He's a hemisync teacher as well. And right now I can't think of it. Tell me about a Sacred Acoustics. What does that do as far as helping us get deeper into ourselves and explore?
Well, Sacred Acoustics is similar to hemisync and other types of brainwave entrainment technology in that it includes something called binaural beats. And binaural beats are a specific kind of sound where a particular frequency is delivered to one ear and a slightly different frequency is delivered to the other ear. And the difference between those two frequencies create a wavering sensation in the brain. And that actually drives the brain into lower brainwave states. So our kind of walking around space is known as beta when measured with an EEG. And that's when we're talking and analyzing and having conversations. And delta, theta, and alpha are those lower brainwave states. And these particular tones are able to help the listener of those tones get into those lower brainwave states more easily. And so that helps very much with quieting that monkey mind, with helping us get relaxed when we're anxious about something. And it helps bring us into what's known as the hypnagogic state. Now, binaural beats can be used for focus, for sleep and all of that, but our particular focus is to bring people into that hypnagogic state. Now, the hypnagogic state is that border roughly between delta and theta, and we're all in that state every day when we first wake up in the morning and when we're getting ready to fall asleep at night, where our body is very relaxed, but our mind is still kind of aware. And so by helping listeners of this audio technology get into that hypnagogic state, we are able to then use intention and other types of tools, mental tools, to, yes, exactly what you said, expand our consciousness, reach our higher self, start to connect with departed loved ones. There's all kinds of things that people can do when listening to these tones.
So basically, what I'm understanding, and I had a similar experience with holosync many years ago because I had been meditating for probably 6 years at that point, but I hadn't gotten to that deep level of meditation, that really deep where you feel that expansive consciousness. And I know a lot of people come to me and they're like, I just can't get my mind quieted. And, these type of technologies help me get past that barrier, which, people that have had near-death experiences get past that barrier and they're okay after, they have to practice it as well afterwards so they get the experience. But you and I took years to go through the techniques that I'm noticing in your bio to practice what they experienced through death, their near-death experience. So I find that very interesting that we can have different paths, and we experience something similar.
Yes, and near-death experiences and other types of experiences can come unbidden, unexpectedly. But the beauty of the binaural beats and other types of ways to do this is that you can cultivate it. You can do it intentionally, and you can absolutely, with practice, reach these states. Now, something really interesting is going on in the brainstem, which I think Eben can explain a little better.
Absolutely.
I was attracted to binaural beat brain entrainment beginning about 2 years after my coma. Now, those who are familiar with my story as told in Proof of Heaven and the Map of Heaven, and expanded upon greatly in our new book, Living in the Mindful Universe, but from Proof of Heaven, will realize that the deep mystery to me as a neuroscientist, having spent more than 20 years in academic neurosurgery, the deep mystery was how come meningitis, a severe meningoencephalitis, bacterial, how in the world did that result in a very robust expansion of conscious awareness into ultra reality that was far beyond any kind of conscious awareness I'd ever experienced in my life. And that was a real mystery because modern neuroscience would tell us that the neocortex, the outer surface of the brain, is the part that makes us human. Every bit of the detail of our conscious awareness of everything, our language, everything we see and hear, smell, our body relation in space, all of our executive functions, the linguistic brain, every single bit of that depends on that high-powered calculator, the neocortex. And that's why meningitis is such a perfect model for human death, because it preferentially destroys the outer surface of the brain, the human part. And that, to me, was a very deep mystery. And I've had over 9 years trying to resolve that with everything I know about neuroscience and physics and the nature of reality, trying to explain my experience. Now, about 2 years after comas, I was beginning to realize that the only way to get deeper answers to explain my journey were to really explore deep into consciousness. Basically, I learned the concept that you could use these slight differences in sound to get very extraordinary states of conscious awareness. The binaural beat phenomenon was first described in the mid-1800s by a Prussian physicist named Dove, and he found that a slight difference between the two tones into the two ears would generate this wavering sound that Karen mentioned. Well, it turns out that wavering sound is generated in a very ancient circuit in the lower brainstem. It's generated in what's called the superior olivary complex, and that circuit had its origins more than 300 million years ago in evolutionary neurobiology. And that is a very crucial fact, because what we're actually doing is getting right down to the origin of consciousness itself. And by basically entraining that system in the lower brainstem, you start to modulate the overall dominant binding effect of the lower brainstem on the rest of consciousness, which is basically constructed in billions and billions of connections between the neocortex and the thalamus, which is a deeper structure in the brain. And you can modulate that. And so, in fact, what we're doing, what I believe we're doing, is using this differential sound frequency to basically numb and kind of dumb down the neocortex, which allows your conscious awareness to go free. And when you combine this kind of thinking with the modern version of our understanding of the mind-body connection in neuroscience and philosophy of mind, which is that consciousness is fundamental, it is primordial, it is not generated by the brain at all. Consciousness is what creates the entire universe. And this, of course, is what near-death experiencers and prophets and mystics over thousands of years have come in touch with to give us all of our notions about spirituality and about religion. It all originates in that one mind, that original primordial consciousness. Many would call that God, because that's what you experience in deep prayer and meditation and in these extraordinary journeys. And yet, each and every one of us are directly connected to that universal mind, to that collective consciousness through this spark of self-awareness. And that is the deep mystery. So, very important to point out that our consciousness is not the little voice in our head, that little voice of the ego, the linguistic brain, all the rational and logical concepts that it presents to us, the idea of self and non-self. That's not who we are at all. The deep mystery of who we are, that self-awareness, is far grander than that. And what we're talking about now is taking advantage of these modern notions in quantum physics and in neuroscience about consciousness, and trying to help people go through the veil. And going through the veil is actually, from my point of view, mainly constructed at the level of that neocortex. And in fact, even things as primordial as time and space actually originate on this side of the veil. So by basically using this kind of meditative technique to neutralize that veil and be able to slip through in your conscious awareness, we're allowing every sentient being to gain access to that universal mind, which is at the core of all of creation in the universe. So these are extremely powerful tools. I cannot paint it strongly enough what a radical shift this is in modern neuroscience and in our understanding of the nature of reality. But the good news is you don't have to wait for the scientific community to fully wake up to this, which they will do and are doing. As an individual sentient being, you can start taking advantage of it now and start exploring and gaining much richer creative insight, connection to source, to the co-creative force at the core of the universe, to that God force. We can all gain access to that, but it does involve leaving the petty little ego and the linguistic brain and all its teeny little concepts about self and non-self in the rearview mirror, because this is an extraordinary journey of discovery.
So I want to make sure I understand this. The neocortex did I understand that correctly? That is kind of like the veil in a sense where we break through that? And
I would say that the neocortex is a main part of constructing the veil. By presenting to us this elaborate kind of here-now locality. We're basically eddy currents in the self-awareness of the universe.
Okay.
And so what we're trying to do is help sentient beings recognize that sense of self and even their sense of a here and now as being a fundamental reality is an illusion. It's what Karen and I in our book, Living in a Mindful Universe, refer to as the supreme illusion. And it's important for people to recognize that the brain and mind are extremely clever at fooling us. And where they fool us is in the fact that all the stuff we see out there in the world that we experience is here I am, and then I look around and I listen and I experience all of that world out there. Well, in fact, all of that is a construct within mind. And that is a crucial stepping stone to getting where all this leads. Every single bit of it. No human being has ever experienced anything other than the inside of their own consciousness. And again, that has with it packaged that sense of self versus non-self and a sense of a here and a now. And a very limited bandwidth. So we're talking about really gigantic bandwidth, which of course is what near-death experiencers have been describing as their problem, the beauty of their journey, but also a problem because our language is very good at handling events within the limited bandwidth of our consensus reality, like a trip to Disney World. But our language is not at all good at conveying these kind of extraordinary journeys, just like what NDEers have been reporting for thousands of years from all cultures, is a realm that's far more real than this world. People have the false impression that NDEs are murky and dreamlike and kind of, what? They're not. This is the dream realm, this little consensus reality we live in. So we're trying to help people get in touch with that far grander reality to make better sense of their lives.
So this is a slightly off-topic question, but it just hit me when I was thinking about it. We're thinking about brain entrainment and the physiology of the brain. There are, of course, some people that believe that as you get deep into like a theta level, or some people call that shamanic, state, or standing in two worlds, that the pineal gland will basically secrete some kind of Christos, or I've had some people say they felt like glass shattered in the brain when they got to that state of illumination. And then it kind of illuminates their body and they become enlightened or Christed or something like that. What are your thoughts for both of you actually on that subject, in the pineal gland and stuff for the brain?
Well, I wouldn't get too hung up on the pineal gland.
Okay.
It is a source of DMT, which is, of course, is a natural hallucinogen in our body, and some people focus on DMT as the spirit molecule and all that. But in my mind, there's something far, far grander here that is not as simplistic as DMT relationships and the pineal gland and all. And of course, Rene Descartes kind of got that focus on the pineal going centuries ago when he called it the seat of the soul. And the reason he said that was it was one of the few structures in the brain that is unified. It's a midline structure that doesn't have a right and a left component to it. And he thought that that kind of unification led to a notion of oneness with the soul. But from my point of view as a neuroscientist and as an explorer into deep levels of consciousness, I don't spend a lot of time dwelling on any issues relating to DMT, because DMT is not the cause of NDEs. I can certainly say it had no role in my NDE because my neocortex, which is where all the receptors for DMT molecules are, my neocortex was offline. So DMT played no role in my journey. And people also mistake the idea that you look at the linguistic report of, say, a DMT or an LSD trip, and it might sound like the words used by somebody after an NDE. And even though I will admit that those drugs do fascinating things to show us about relationships with consciousness and what the nature of reality is. And I talk a lot about that in my blogs on ebenalexander.com. But the reality is there's something much deeper going on here, and it involves mainly the neocortex and brainstem, and those are the mechanisms for really escaping this Maya, this illusion of our existence in this supreme illusion that we discussed.
And I would just add that, yes, a lot of people definitely are focused on the pineal gland as that third eye, that ability to see beyond the here and now. But I like to move us one step beyond the actual physical organs of the body and start to think about us as more energetic beings. And there's an energy associated with every organ in the body. So the pineal gland certainly, you know, when the Eastern traditions talk about chakras, you know, the third eye is an energetic thing associated with a physical piece of the body. But it doesn't necessarily mean that pineal gland is the cause. There's a correlative maybe association. But I think getting too hung up on the physical aspects of this and attributing it all to physical and chemical reactions is a mistake. In fact, I would say I agree with Eben on that, but from a different angle. And I would say the heart is a similar sort of thing. People talk about the heart as the center of love and emotions. And of course, in our materialist kind of world, we're just conditioned to think of the pineal gland and the heart as organs, but there's an energetic heart as well. And many people like to connect through that pineal gland. Many meditative techniques have us focusing on that area between the eyes on the forehead. For anyone who doesn't know, it's right here. But also you can focus on the energy of the heart. And the more you can focus on the energetic aspects of these organs, the more you're really able to kind of make that connection with the expansive part of you. The expansive part of you is energy. And so these things can be thought of, you know, as, I guess you can use the word mechanism, but they're kind of mental tools that we have in our, you know, mental approaches to things we have in our bodies, but they are associated with energy. And the energy is what we're trying to get in touch with.
I think that's really powerful what you just said, and I think that for the people that are viewing this to realize that, you know, we also don't want to focus on just one chakra. Or if we do under the chakras, we want to focus on we're whole, we're one. And so if you focus on just the heart or the brow chakra or whatever, you're now fragmenting yourself in a sense by just focusing on one limited area of yourself. So interesting. Thank you so much for that. How did you? I know that you guys met after Dr. Alexander's 2008 near-death experience. How did that come about? I mean, you don't have to get too personal. I just was curious for the listeners and how you guys met.
Well, as it happens, we met in the context of sound. We were both exploring sound as a way to explore within consciousness. Eben explained his reason after his near-death experience, wanting to figure out another way to kind of take his neocortex offline without having to get some life-threatening disease. Now, I had been a meditator tried to be a meditator for quite some time and found it very challenging, very difficult. And it was sound that helped me get past that barrier. And like you said, with helping quiet the mind. So at first it was gongs or tuning forks or crystal bowls that I really like. Now all of those have that similar waver. And if you analyze the sound of a Tibetan bowl or crystal bowl, you'll find there's an embedded binaural beat going on there, very interestingly. And so it was those types of sounds and brainwave entrainment technology in particular that I was exploring for different reasons, different motivation, but similar reasons. And so Eben and I met in the context of exploring this sound. And very interestingly, when we met, I knew he had had a near-death experience, but I didn't really know anything else about his story. And this was before the book came out, and so his story was not public much. And so when I asked him, what did you learn on your near-death experience, I was expecting an answer because I knew other people who had had them. And most people learn a really important spiritual lesson about love or some personal issue that they have that they were able to get past, or they communicate with long-lost relatives that help them get through another sort of situation. So I was expecting an answer like that. And so when I said, what did you learn about your near-death experience? He says to me, the brain doesn't create consciousness. So he was very excited about that, as we all know from listening to him speak. And my answer to that was, why would anyone think that it does? Okay. So I was quite unfamiliar with the entire materialistic worldview. Of course, I knew in our society that many people thought that our existence is birth to death, and nothing more, that it ends. But I never bought into that at all. My kind of internal knowing ever since I was a child and other things that I exposed myself to beyond sort of traditional teachings, definitely my truth rang very high with our souls are eternal. We are everlasting. We were existing before we were born, albeit not in this particular form, and we exist after. So that comment was very confusing to me. And then, of course, I start learning about the neocortex, and I'm like, what's that? And I started to learn all about the brain and the other side of things. So it's very interesting that my source of knowledge came from teachings such as the Kabbalah, theosophical texts, anthroposophy, things like that is where I was able to find answers to questions such as, why are we here and what is our purpose? Physics and chemistry and biology didn't really answer those kinds of questions for me. And my explorations went into entirely different angles. But what's so very interesting when Eben and I met is that he was coming from a very much a scientific worldview, very much science only. And I was coming from a spiritual point of view, not religious, but spiritual point of view, no science. And yet we were able to, when we had our conversations, when he would start telling me about, the oneness and the this, that, and the love, and we found some very interesting common ground. And I was able to kind of connect some dots for Eben, kind of from that science. What he was learning was completely wrong. I was able to kind of connect the dots to some things that were more in line with what he learned on his experience. Did you want to add anything?
Just, yes, that was, it was, I knew literally within the first hour of meeting Karen that we shared some deep, ancient connection. And after my NDE had become much more attuned to that kind of awareness and intuition. And I remember even telling her very early on in the first hours or days of our spending time together at this workshop, I said we were going to travel the world and we were going to change this world. And she would be up on stage with me. And of course, she would tell you I said, no, I won't be up there presenting with you. I don't do that. I'm a technology girl. I'm behind the scenes. I help people. And plus I had an incredible fear of public speaking, and it wasn't interest of mine at all. But no, he was quite certain. And actually my response was, no, you're a nut. You're crazy. And look who was correct, because
what actually happened is that when he had an opportunity to listen to the sounds, I had actually, when we met, I had been already in a connection with another person. His name is Kevin Cossey, and he's a mechanical and electrical engineer. And when we met, he was also exploring sound, and he told me that he wanted to make his own sound. And I, of course, had listened to everything on the market. I had amassed a huge library of different technologies and different types of sounds. And so when he told me he wanted to make his own, he hadn't started yet, we somehow began a collaboration. And we began by analyzing all of the sounds that I already had acquired. And we learned how to create, from looking at how other people did it, how to create. First, we duplicated what some other people had done just for our own personal use. But then we started to realize we could make it better. We could make it more powerful. And it was our purpose just to explore on a personal level. And Kevin and I would create these recordings. He was in Manhattan, I was in Baltimore at the time, and we would listen to them at the same time and then get on the phone and tell each other what happened. And so we began to have these shared journeys in consciousness, which was just so fascinating. It was our hobby, I would say, for about a good part of a year. Instead of going to movies and out on dates or something, we were home in our respective homes listening to these tones, having wonderful explorations of consciousness. Now, when we met Eben, for some reason, we had this connection, and I offered to let him listen to these sounds. And Eben was like, oh my God, these are so strong, very powerful. And we then invited Eben to listen with us on these three-way journeys, as we called them. And so by the time the book came out, about a year later, we had developed all kinds of different ways to explore consciousness between the three of us. And Eben thought it would be a wonderful idea to help other people by sharing these audio tools with others. And that is when Kevin and I then formally created Sacred Acoustics. And then Eben actually, this is when his vision started to come true, because shortly after the book came out, he put my name on a flyer for a workshop and said I would be there with him. And that's how he got me. And I stood up and talked for a few minutes and played the sounds for the audience. I had no idea what was going to happen. And after the sounds ended, the audience started giving us amazing stories. A woman who said, oh my gosh, I connected with my dog who died 3 years ago, and all kinds of other amazing sort of experiences that people were having. And just by playing these sounds over speakers. Now, since then, we fine-tuned our presentations, and we do kind of make some plans. And my name is on the flyers now. But yes, that is how it all began.
I'm only laughing in a sense because I did that to a friend of mine. I was speaking at a church, and I put her name on the ballot to speak with me and do mediumship messages. And she's terrified of public speaking, so she's standing at the pulpit with me, and she's grabbing my hand behind the pulpit because she's so scared. And it's one of those things she brings up at Christmas every year now that I put her on.
Karen's a natural. She's very good at this.
I'm sure she is. She's doing so well right now, so I can see.
Well, it turns out the fear of public speaking is really interesting, because if you just kind of start talking like you're talking to a friend, and the audience is just seated across from you in your living room, that's how I look at it. And it's not a big scary thing anymore. I just talk like, they're my neighbors.
It's just coming from the heart. Yeah. That keeps it simple.
I have along the same lines of what we're talking about. I'm writing this workshop on people's awakening process, and how they typically go through some major trauma, like a near-death experience or a major loss in their life, and then they go through like a dark night of the soul. Some of them, they have different experiences and stuff like that. So I had an experience in about 2008 after 2 years of using binaural beats, and I had an experience where I expanded my consciousness, and I saw us all as these little fractals of light. And much like Alex Gray's painting, The Universal Lattice Mind, we were like that universal lattice mind, all interconnected by light. And so I thought to myself, well, what is all that? And to me, this is similar to what I've heard some people experience in a near-death experience or an out-of-body experience in some cases, but it's an out of, like, literally a consciousness experience. Do you think, because I know with people with NDEs, they take a few years to process this, sometimes 2-3 years to process their NDE. I also feel that people that have experiences like you and I, Karen, that haven't necessarily had the near-death experience, they have to process that for several years as well. They're like, okay, what was that? What had just happened? And did you have a similar experience that just once you were doing your awakening experience, I guess is the way to put it, that you had to process through that?
Yes, absolutely. And what I really want to highlight is what you said was after 2 years of listening to binaural beats is when you had that amazing kind of breakthrough. And it's very interesting because many people, they want it to happen faster. It's very common in our Western culture. They want to go to a weekend workshop and have an experience like Eben had. And why isn't that happening for me? And people are very impatient. And we've had others tell us that, say after, these are on our website testimonial pages, this particular one, say after 18 months of listening, a woman started to have spontaneous out-of-body experiences without even trying. And that led to Kundalini awakenings. And she was able to have all kinds of things happen, but only after that long period. Another person we know who's a medium, she started meditating after she lost her stepdaughter. And not using binaural beats, but she began a meditative practice every single morning. And after 2 years, someone started talking back to her. And this is when she realized she could develop these mediumship skills. And so it does take that practice. And of course, that processing that you're talking about, yes, in fact, we encourage people to to keep journals and keep track of little things that have happened, because those little experiences, unlike Eben, where it was this one full-blown experience, I have a series of countless, dozens, maybe hundreds of little experiences, and they start to add up, and they are connected one to the other over time, and you can really keep track better if you make notes in a journal. And in my case, I had many other practices that I tried. I tried Sufi heart rhythm meditation. I learned how to do Reiki. I learned how to communicate with animals. I learned healing touch with animals. I learned all kinds of different things, remote viewing. And of course, it all ended up being, my particular practice ended up being a conglomeration of what worked best for me and all of those techniques. And we highly encourage people to try more than one thing. And if and combine what works for you. Many people talk about, oh, when you meditate, you must sit in this particular posture, and that particular posture may not get you to the state as quickly as it might for other people. And so experiment. Try not to stay too locked into a particular dogma meaning strict rules for a way to do certain things. And you'll find that if you can adjust a little bit to your particular preference, some amazing things can start to happen.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And I think that's what gestation, they call that. Everything happens in its time. And no offense, Dr. Alexander, I'd rather go through the 2 years than go through the death experience.
Well, the good news is no one needs to wait to be smoked down by meningitis. You don't have to wait for a big NDE to get to know every bit of this.
Yeah.
By cultivating a practice of going within and exploring consciousness, every soul can get to the lessons they need to learn. And it's not necessarily going to take 2 years, so I don't want people to be turned off by that, because we've had people who had profound experiences even in a first workshop. So you just need to be open to it and trust that the universe will help you and will show you. You can ask the universe. And also remember, you're not going to think your way to this. This is not about reading all the books, watching the DVDs, going to the talks. It's not for the armchair philosopher. This is about personal experience. And as Karen often points out in our workshops, every soul can engender and cultivate this kind of personal experience to let the universe show them deeper truth about their connection to the universe. And that, I think, is what is so important for people to understand.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. I wanted to jump into your guys' website really quick, just so we can take a look at it for Sacred Acoustics, and then we'll take a glance at the page for the book as well, real quick. So I'm going to just jump in here and take a look at Sacred Acoustics, just as it sounds, sacredacoustics.com. And it shows even that they're going to be in New York City on October 7th at the top of the website, and in Ottawa on October 21st. It looks like you can probably find out stuff about those events on their page as well. So testimonials and contact information, courses that you can take. It looks like you can purchase the CDs here, Event Horizon and Foundation Series and stuff like that. So, take advantage of checking out the site. Also,
and don't forget our free download that's available on the Sacred Acoustics site. Yes,
sorry, right there.
Yeah, if you go to the free download page and enter your email, we will send you a link to a free download to try. It's a 20-minute file, and many people, that's all they ever listen to. You never even have to buy anything. So we want to give you something that is actually a usable tool and not just a quick little 1-minute sample.
So I'm doing that right now.
Perfect. Great.
Thanks for signing up.
You're welcome. So, and it was that easy. It took me 2 seconds. So the other thing I wanted to point out to you guys is their book, Your 33-Day Journey into the Heart of Consciousness. This is coming out October 17th, Living in the Mindful Universe. And that is, I guess you can pre-order it here as well. So everybody can go to, I'm out at ebenalexander.com for that.
Yes, and that 33-day journey is related to the book. It's actually an online course that you can also sign up for, completely free, and click on that for us, the 33-day journey book.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, when you go there, it's actually a companion to the book, completely free. You enter your email there and start to begin receiving one email each day, and it will have a concept from the book, 33 different concepts, and a practice. We want you to start to practice different techniques. And so we give you different techniques. They're all in the book, almost all of them, but we outline them in this course more in a one step at a time. And this will stay live after the book is released as well. And we have over 2,300 people signed up already. And the beautiful part of this course is that people are leaving comments from all over the world about their experiences, about thoughts that they have, and it's turning into an amazing community of like-minded people supporting each other on their own personal journeys.
Awesome. And obviously you have to go in and confirm your email address, but I'll do that after the show. So,
yeah.
So I'm going to stop sharing. I just want to make sure that we got people seeing your guys' websites so that they know where to go and find information about what we're discussing here. So, because this is really profound stuff that could really, and Dr. Alexander, yes, change the world, as she had stated in our story earlier. So.
Well, it's the power is in our hands, in all of our hands, collectively, into the group that your listeners and many other like-minded people. I think it's important to point out this book is not just a how-to guide of spirituality and connection for the modern thinker, although it's absolutely that, but also for the kind of curious but not necessarily spiritual or whatever out there who are just modern, intelligent people who want to know where the science of consciousness is. How do we interpret quantum physics in this era to properly understand where this world is going? This book is one of I would say, the deepest kind of attempts of synthesis of modern science and spirituality that we know of. And that is something that we're very proud of. It's, if you look on that ebenalexander.com on that book page and look at the endorsers for it, we have a number of very renowned scientific names who are known around the world as leaders in the field of consciousness studies who are endorsing this book. So it's really a very advanced scientific assessment of the nature of reality as it stands in the year 2017. So I think people will find this book to be a fascinating kind of expose of that evolving scientific understanding of the nature of consciousness.
So we take that science that Eben is so beautiful at putting all together. He connects a lot of dots between things like quantum mechanics and different theories of how the brain works, like filter theory. And then we take people into all kinds of personal stories that we have had with, especially Eben, with other people out in the world, like, you know, Edgar Mitchell, Ram Dass, Gary Zukav, other spiritual leaders in their own right. And that journey that he took is also available to all of us. And so as we explain Eben's journey, we include tools for others, but it's all with that very scientific foundation. This is, in a sense, this is not new news. However, this book is putting things together in a new way that has really not been done up until now, with the level of science that we include, and along with the level of spirituality we include. Is a rather ambitious thing that we've done. Many publishers want to call it one or the other, but it really is both.
And all. It's really where I would say most investigators of consciousness and brain and mind studies in this current era, this is pointing the direction where it's all headed. And it is absolutely revolutionary. So in that sense, it's big news. But in many ways, it's simply a consolidation of some of the greatest wisdom out of spiritual traditions, East and West, but all catalyzed by this incredible power of our modern understanding of cosmology and quantum physics and the nature of space, time, mass, energy, and causality that links each and every one of us very directly to the meaning and purpose of this universe. And that's where I think it is so valuable for both a cultural perspective, for all members of humanity, as we often say, no soul left behind. This is where we're going with this, and we don't want anyone left out of this. We love feedback and hope to hear from people both at ebenalexander.com and acoustics.com, because this really is about a revolution in human understanding that is unprecedented.
I think it's amazing when we bring science and spirituality, I don't want to say religion, just spirituality together, because I think at one time, that somebody told me years ago that physicians actually, 200-300 years ago, would actually study astrology and stuff like that, because they associated different things in astrology to different parts of the body. And it seems to me that the physician was not just the scientist, but he was also the philosopher, and there was a spiritual aspect to this to the physician as well. So, do you think that the new way of consciousness and the practices we're doing now is kind of bringing us back into that type of thinking that we had 400 or 500 years ago between science and
yes, one of the biggest problems in our modern society is everybody seems to want to know, where is the science on this? Where is the science taking us? And one of the problems is in our burgeoning academia of modern science, we've gotten to a point where you've got a whole bunch of experts on their own tiny little niche about the nature of reality, physicists and chemists, engineers, neuroscientists who just study the brain and expect to find consciousness there, things like that. So what we really need is a much more global look at the nature of reality. And that's something that we feel we provide in this book, because you really have to open your mind. You have to get out of your comfort zone. As a scientist, having spent more than 15 years on faculty as an associate professor at Harvard Medical School, I thought I knew how the brain and mind and consciousness work to some degree. Now, I realized there were tremendous gaps in our knowledge, but at least I thought I was following the right set of breadcrumbs. And that was all based in scientific materialism, or physicalism, the notion that only the physical exists. And what I've come to realize, and what every neuroscientist and philosopher of mind sooner or later reaches, is the point where they realize the brain is not producing consciousness at all. Consciousness is much more fundamental, and it gets very deep from that point on. And so what we're trying to do is connect the dots across this broad range of disciplines and of human experience and of leading edges of cosmology and physics, where there are huge question marks. And what we're trying to do is bring a lot of that together under the umbrella of a world view that can actually make sense. And the most beautiful thing about this evolving worldview is it points out the importance that each and every soul has in participating in the evolution of consciousness itself. Each and every soul is involved, and that's why we say no soul left behind. This is a crucial evolution of humanity that is, I feel, inevitable, but also absolutely essential. When you read the news today or the fake news today, you look around at all the difficulties hitting our world in the form of natural disasters, in the form of humanity versus humanity conflicts, like what we're currently facing with some of our world leaders going places I cannot even imagine around war and conflict. It's because we are badly in need of fixing a horribly broken system. And I would say most of that false notion of separation that can allow for this kind of insanity has arisen from as kind of using the framework of materialist science of the 20th and early 21st century that continues to perpetuate a myth about separation. And this is something that we try very hard to overcome in our book, Living in a Mindful Universe, because I think this world must awaken. I would say it's in our destiny. Much of our talks about this really reflect on 3,000 years of human thinking, and we feel it's a convergence point, a fulcrum, and that this is where individuals can play a tremendous role in shifting the direction of humanity's course in the coming years. And that is exactly what Living in a Mindful Universe is all about.
Now, you also, though, mentioned physicians who kind of knew both worlds. I mean, I would take it back even further to shamans back in the day. That the same person was the healer, the astronomer, the scientist, and the spiritual. And I agree with you. And as Eben was saying, you know, it is coming together. And I think these physicians, let's say any scientists, who have their little niches and like to be an expert, but they don't understand something else. I just don't know how they can be making such sweeping statements about things they have no personal knowledge of. And I would encourage any scientist, doctor, or any one of that ilk to have a meditative practice at a minimum, to really understand firsthand how that connection to something greater than us really works. And each of us are unique. Each of us has a slightly different way of connecting. And the more of us who begin to do this, that will start to make us realize that myth of separation just isn't true. And we will know firsthand, even the doctors, even the scientists, and that will bring science and spirituality together.
Yeah, and I think that's happening. I mean, there's so many, I mean, every year I hear about something new, or some business person or a doctor. There was a neuroscientist. She did a TED Talks, and I can't remember her name. She walks out with a brain and talks about her stroke.
Taylor.
Yes.
Beautiful TED Talk.
Yes.
Her book was very influential on me about 4 months after my coma.
Yeah, she was amazing.
How much the linguistic brain itself, that little tiny part in our Wernicke's area in the dominant temporal lobe, which is where we store all of our definitions, our senses of relationship, and kind of actions that can happen. The language that describes all that is in a tiny part of the brain, and that's what got wrecked in her brain. She had a small vascular malformation there that ruptured back in 1996, and I love her talk, and it helped me to realize, because my entire neocortex got taken away, not just my linguistic brain. And I think that's one of the reasons I had such an absolutely extraordinary experience. But hers was important to me because it clarified how much of the problem starts with that linguistic brain and the kind of assumptions and kind of framework that it puts together for this small bandwidth of understanding. But we pay a big price for that. Yeah. And so she was able to transcend very rapidly as she had that hemorrhage, where the boundaries of self expanded out and she became one with the desk, the chair, the room, the trees outside the window. She became one with it all, and with this beautiful sense of oneness, love, connection, as if it was all perfectly united as it should be. And it was like that was the first time she'd seen that in her life. And I love her description of that part of the journey.
And I bet it changed her big time as a scientist.
It did. Yeah. She talks about that. There's another man that's lives by you guys. He's a doctor. He was I don't remember what hospital he worked at, but his name was Greg Corbin. He didn't have a near-death experience, but he had his child died, and he was able to talk to his child after, and so that was an awakening experience. So these things are happening,
Right.
and I think we're stepping into this new era of merging of science and spirituality. And I think that because everybody's spiritual, I mean, Dr. Moody talks about when he was in medical school, one of the doctors came up and asked him about his book and said, I had this experience where I was trying to resuscitate somebody and the spirit came out of their body.
Right.
So, I mean, and hospice workers have, experienced
Right.
that many.
Yeah, but people like that are very often, not always, but very often afraid to talk about it.
Yeah.
They think because they are ridiculed, because they are, just dismissed. Eben, as a doctor, did that to his patients because that's just how they were taught. And it really is wonderful when they start to have their own experiences, like Eben did, how then they are emboldened and they're not as nervous about sharing for fear of
Yeah, I have a couple of friends that are medical doctors, and the things that they want to talk about because they have spiritual. One's a psychiatrist. She says, "I want to tell the person with the angel's standing over their head and say they don't need this medication; they just need to meditate." She goes, "But I can't." So
Right.
interesting.
Soon, perhaps she can.
She might. So we're in our last few minutes here. What are some things, words of wisdom, or things that you guys would like to share, maybe that we haven't talked about in the last 50 minutes or so?
Well, I would like to just add that that subtitle of our book, A Neurosurgeon's Journey into the Heart of Consciousness, that has a few different meanings there. Of course, the heart is the center of consciousness, the deep meaning of consciousness. That certainly means that on that one level. But the heart is an incredibly key part of this. We spend a lot of time talking about the brain, and of course, brainwave entrainment technology leads us to talk about the brain. But what we're really trying to do is get that brain out of the way. And another technique that, along with sound, that for me was a huge part of my journey was moving my energy to the heart and learning how the heart really works, the energetic part of the heart. And Eben likes to tell the story when we first met, how he would talk about love, the unconditional love that he touched, and then he would just start talking about the neocortex, and I was like, well, what about the heart? And we spent a lot of time talking about that heart, and in our workshops and in the book, and anytime I talk to anyone, the heart is a beautiful point of focus that all of us can have very easily, and it helps to lessen that monkey mind along with the sound by moving your awareness to your heart. And so a technique that I often recommend to people is to imagine that your breath is moving in and out of your heart. And this can just immediately bring your awareness down to another level. Now, the heart has no linguistic qualities to it at all. And it's like animals, they don't have linguistics either, and they are known for very easily expressing unconditional love, at least our domestic pets like dogs especially. And the heart is very key to our story. It's key in the book, and we take you from the brain to the heart throughout the book. That is the path that we go. So that definitely bears mentioning. Did you have something?
I would just add that you brought it up a few minutes ago about healing and the physician and all, but this is really about healing in the big sense. And there I would say healing is becoming whole. Those two words have the same root. And we are all incarnate in these forms to become more whole. That's what this soul school, this journey, is all about. Becoming more complete in our understanding of our oneness with the universe. And of course, a message that's been brought back for thousands of years from journeyers and seekers of all stripes, including the leaders of all our religions, has to do with that oneness and love, that this is about unconditional love, ideally, and about compassion, acceptance, mercy, forgiveness, kindness between human beings. Ultimately, these will be the qualities that express this oneness of the one mind. We're all dreaming, sharing the dream of the one mind, but we do that, and the drama is so beautiful and instructive because of this kind of sense of separation, that we're individual. But it helps us in that journey to realize that at a deeper level, we are all truly one. So that old lesson from all religions, do unto others as you would have done unto yourself, really means that we are expressing that one mind. If I hurt someone else, I am hurting myself. And also realizing that the best way to express love for self, and that is the connection I have with the universe and with that God, that infinitely loving God, the best way to express that love within myself and for myself is to serve as a conduit for that love to flow through. And what I think this reveals to people, and something else we touch on in this book, is that any mental, physical, and emotional health must fundamentally be based in a spiritual health. And when I use the word spiritual there, what I mean is a sense of meaning and purpose in our existence, a sense of connection to others, not just with humans, and not just limited to life on Earth. This is much bigger than that, but with all sentience throughout the universe. And it's that sense of connection and recovering how love is the binding force of that connection that I think can offer so many people a way out of the apparent darkness of the separation of our modern materialistic society, but allow them to see how this beautiful soul school allows for all of us to participate in humanity healing, becoming more whole, becoming one. And I often say that just like that old adage, all politics is local. Well, likewise, all of the evolution of consciousness is no more than individual sentient beings participating in this soul school and learning and teaching the lessons we are here to share and to grow from. And I think that is the real beauty of seeing the kind of oneness that is a natural state for this world, and very much one that is at odds with the crazy kind of conflict and separation that we see in the news today, but it is absolutely the pathway out of that.
And I have to add, just to put our comments together here, this connection that we all share is very much illustrated through the energy of the heart. Heart math teaches about the torus field. It comes out of each of our hearts, out the top of the head, back in a constant motion. And those heart fields actually, according to all of their studies, scientific studies, those heart fields actually affect those people around us. And so as our heart is going out, gathering information, bringing it back in, the heart sends more information to the brain than the brain sends to the heart. But also our signal is going out. Our vibration is going out and affecting people. This is happening whether we're conscious of it or not. And for me, that's a very useful sort of model for how we're all connected and how we can actually become more aware of it. And our emotional state affects the size of our heart field. And so each of us has the ability to manage it. And I feel it's an imperative for each of us to be aware of that energy and the fact that it affects other people, and to really focus on how can we bring more love into our energy field, because it is affecting people around us. And the more of us who do that, that's, again, another way that our world will start to change.
Yeah, I think that's profound, because when you think about the Taurus, that's basically the Merkaba to me. That when they talked about in ancient times, or the rainbow, that they
Light body,
light body.
yeah.
I mean, there's some people that theorize that that the light body is the stargate. When we go into our consciousness, and they think it's the physical body, but it's really your consciousness expanding out into these infinite possibilities, I guess.
Yeah, and it comes from the center of the heart, not the brain. So very interesting. When you talk about the chakras and the light body, the heart is in the middle. That's the center.
The
That's
governor.
where it anchors the above and below chakras. So that's, for me, that's really where it's at.
As above, so below. There you go. So
Absolutely.
awesome. Well, thank you so much. And everybody, thank you for watching the Positive Talker. This has been a powerful, powerful interview. And I'm sure we'll have Dr. Alexander on and Karen on at some other point in time in the future. So everybody, blessings and have an amazing day.